Thanks for tuning in to Cheating Confessions. Don't miss the jaw-dropping conclusion. My name is Rachel, I am 41 years old, and I've been married to Daniel for 12 years. We have a wonderful son, Ethan, who just turned 9. We live in a cozy house on the outskirts of Seattle, where life flows steadily and calmly. But there has always been something inside me seeking adventure. Something I couldn't quite understand, even for myself. From the outside, my life with Daniel seemed perfect, but over time, I began to notice how our marriage was gradually slipping into a dull routine. Daniel, who is now 44, began spending more and more time at his law firm, coming home late and drained of energy. He used to be attentive, noticing the little things that would brighten up my day, but all of that seemed to vanish. Our once lively conversations turned into predictable, mundane exchanges about daily matters. The passion and excitement that had once connected us had slowly faded away. I've always considered myself an attractive woman. I'm in good shape with a slender figure and light brown hair that I take pride in maintaining. On the day that changed everything, I decided to wear something different. A fitted navy dress that accentuated my curves and a pair of heels that made me feel confident. It wasn't something I would usually wear around the house, but I craved a change. Perhaps this was the first sign that I was ready for something new. Daniel works as a senior attorney at a respected law firm and often has to work late into the night. This left me spending most of my evenings alone, managing Ethan's schoolwork and running the household. Our son is a bright and energetic boy, but he's always struggled with history, finding it boring and challenging. After much thought and discussion, we decided to hire a tutor to help him improve his grades and hopefully spark his interest in the subject. And so one breezy autumn afternoon, Mark knocked on our door. He was in his early 30s, with a charismatic smile and an air of confidence that made him seem both approachable and intriguing. It was hard not to notice how his dark hair fell slightly over his forehead, giving him a look that seemed straight out of a movie. I felt a flutter in my stomach as I opened the door. "Hi, I'm Mark," he said with an easy smile, extending his hand. "I'm here to help Ethan with his history lessons." "Hello, Mark," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Please, come in." Mark stepped into the house, and it was as if the atmosphere shifted. His presence brought a vibrant energy that had been missing for a long time. We sat in the kitchen, and I showed him Ethan's textbooks and homework assignments. Mark took the time to listen attentively, nodding thoughtfully as he asked questions that displayed his genuine interest in helping my son. "I think Ethan has great potential to improve his grades," he said confidently after a brief discussion. "The key is finding the right approach and being patient." I nodded in agreement, and we arranged a regular schedule for the lessons. From that moment, something inside me felt different, as if I was awakening from a long sleep. The first lesson went smoothly, and Mark proved to be an exceptional teacher, patient, engaging, and full of enthusiasm for the subject. But despite his professionalism, I couldn't help but feel that there was something more between us, something unspoken. Each time he came over, I noticed myself eagerly anticipating his arrival, and I started paying more attention to how I looked before he showed up. With each visit, my attraction to him grew stronger. As Mark continued to tutor Ethan, our conversations became less about history and more about ourselves. I learned that Mark had always been passionate about history, even as a child. He had dreamed of becoming an archaeologist, but life had taken him in a different direction. And now he found himself as a tutor while working on his master's degree. We laughed about the funny moments from his college years, and I felt a bond forming between us. One evening, after an especially stressful day, I found myself sitting alone in the kitchen with a cup of tea when Mark approached me after finishing Ethan's lesson. "Tough day?" he asked, settling into the chair next to me, his voice warm and soothing. "Yes, you could say that," I replied, feeling my guard lower in his presence. "Sometimes it feels like everything has turned into one endless routine." He looked at me with an intensity that made my heart skip a beat. "I know the feeling," he said quietly. "But you seem like someone who deserves more than just the ordinary." His words touched me, and I felt a warmth spread through me that I hadn't felt in a very long time. Our eyes locked, and for a moment the air was charged with something electric. It was as if time had stopped, and I couldn't look away. Then, as if drawn by an invisible force, I leaned in, and our lips met in a kiss that was soft, yet filled with longing. It felt as if I had been waiting for this moment for years. The kiss ended all too soon, and Mark pulled away, his expression a mix of desire and uncertainty. "Rachel, we shouldn't be doing this," he whispered, his breath warm against my skin. "I know," I replied, my voice barely more than a whisper, "but I can't help it." We stared at each other for a long moment, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. Then he gathered his things and left, promising to return for the next lesson. As the door closed behind him, I realized that my life had just changed, and I didn't know where it would lead from here. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about that kiss. I replayed it over and over in my mind, trying to make sense of what it meant. And as Mark continued to come over for Ethan's lessons, I could sense that he was struggling with his feelings just as much as I was. Our gazes lingered a little longer, our touches seemed to carry more meaning, and I knew that we were heading towards something neither of us could resist. One day, when Daniel was away on a business trip, Mark arrived for another lesson. Ethan worked diligently in the living room, while I pretended to be busy in the kitchen washing dishes that were already clean. I couldn't help but listen to the sound of their voices, and when Ethan ran upstairs to show off his latest assignment, Mark walked into the kitchen, his eyes searching for mine. "Rachel," he began, his tone serious, "we need to talk." I felt my heart race as I turned to face him. "I know," I said, unable to hide the nervousness in my voice. "That kiss, it was a mistake, but it wasn't just a mistake," he interrupted, stepping closer and taking my hand in his. "You felt it too, didn't you?" I nodded, unable to find the right words. His touch sent a shiver down my spine, and before I could stop myself, I leaned into him, my lips finding his once again. This time there was no hesitation. The kiss was deeper, more urgent, and I felt myself melting into him. "Rachel," he whispered against my lips, "I can't stop thinking about you. I know this is wrong, but I can't stay away." "I feel the same way," I confessed, feeling the tears well up in my eyes. "But what can we do?" He pulled me into his arms, and I felt a sense of safety and warmth that I hadn't felt in years. "We'll figure it out," he promised. "I don't have all the answers, but I know I can't let this go." We stood there for a moment, wrapped in each other's arms, the world around us fading away. I realized that despite all the obstacles, I couldn't deny what I felt for Mark. It wasn't just a fleeting attraction. It was something deeper, something that made me feel alive again. We kissed once more, and this time, I allowed myself to fully embrace the feelings I had been holding back for so long. As our relationship continued to develop, I found myself looking forward to Mark's visits more than anything else. It wasn't just about the physical attraction, it was about the way he made me feel valued, seen, and appreciated, things I hadn't felt in a long time. Each time he left, I would count down the hours until I could see him again. Several weeks passed, and it became increasingly difficult to hide our feelings. One afternoon, Mark arrived for Ethan's lesson, but instead of heading straight to the living room, he paused by the kitchen. "I missed you," he confessed, his eyes searching mine. "I can't keep pretending that this doesn't mean anything." "I've missed you too," I admitted, feeling my heart pound in my chest. "But we have to be careful. If anyone finds out—" "I know," he interrupted, taking a step closer. "But I'm tired of hiding. I want to be with you, Rachel." His words hung in the air, and I felt a surge of emotions wash over me. It was in that moment that I realized I wanted the same thing. I was done pretending that everything was okay in my marriage and ignoring the emptiness I felt inside. One evening, after Ethan had gone to bed and Daniel was out at yet another late-night work meeting, Mark stayed behind. We sat on the couch talking about our dreams, our fears, and the things that made us who we were. It was the kind of conversation I hadn't had with Daniel in years. As the night went on, I found myself leaning closer to Mark, drawn to the warmth and sincerity in his eyes. "Why do you make me feel this way?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Because you deserve to feel this way," he replied, brushing a strand of hair away from my face. "You deserve to be loved and cherished." I felt tears well up in my eyes, and before I knew it, I was kissing him with a passion I hadn't felt in a long time. Our movements became more frantic, more desperate, as if we were both trying to capture a moment that could slip away at any second. We ended up in the living room, our bodies tangled together on the couch. I felt his hands glide over my skin, exploring every inch of me as if he was committing it to memory. The intensity of our connection left me breathless, and I knew there was no turning back. In that moment, it didn't matter that we were crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. All that mattered was how he made me feel. "Rachel," he whispered against my skin, his breath hot and ragged. "I've wanted this for so long." "Me too," I replied, my voice trembling with emotion. "I don't want this to end." We spent the rest of the night together, wrapped in each other's arms, the weight of the world lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt truly happy, as if I had finally found the missing piece of my life. As the days turned into weeks, Mark and I grew closer. Our conversations became more intimate, our touches more tender, and I felt myself falling deeper in love with him. It was as if a part of me that had been locked away for years was finally set free. And with that freedom came a sense of joy I hadn't experienced in what felt like a lifetime. But with that joy also came fear. Fear of what would happen if Daniel found out. Fear of what this relationship could mean for my son, Ethan. I knew I had to make a choice, and the thought of losing Mark terrified me. One evening, as I was sitting in the kitchen, lost in thought, Daniel walked in. He looked more tired than usual, his eyes weary and distant. "Rachel, we need to talk," he said, his voice serious. "About what?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "Us," he replied, sitting down across from me. "I've noticed that things have changed between us. We're not the same as we used to be, and I think it's time we face that." I felt a lump form in my throat, and I knew where this conversation was heading. "What are you saying?" I asked, barely able to keep my voice steady. "I think we need to separate," he said quietly. "I don't want to keep pretending that everything is okay when it's not. You deserve to be happy, Rachel, and I don't think I'm the one who can make you happy anymore." I stared at him, stunned by his words. For so long I had been waiting for him to show some sign of emotion, some sign that he cared about what was happening to us. But now that it was happening, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "I think you're right," I replied, my voice barely more than a whisper. "We've been pretending for too long." Daniel nodded, his expression sad but resigned. "I want you to be happy, Rachel. I really do." And with that, he stood up and left the room, leaving me sitting there with a mixture of sadness and relief. I knew that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't even imagine, but for the first time in years, I felt a sense of hope. After my conversation with Daniel, I felt as though a heavy burden had been lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't that I was happy about the end of our marriage, but there was a sense of freedom, of possibility, that I hadn't felt in years. I knew that this was my chance to start over, to build a life that was truly mine. The first person I wanted to share this news with was Mark. Later that evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, I called him. "Mark," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "Daniel and I have decided to separate." There was a brief pause, and then I heard him exhale. "Rachel, I'm so sorry," he said gently. "I know this must be difficult for you." "It is," I admitted. "But it's also something I've known was coming for a long time. And I feel like it's the right thing to do." "I'm glad you're finally finding your own path," he replied. You deserve to be happy, Rachel. And if there's anything I can do, anything at all, I'm here for you. Tears filled my eyes, but they were tears of gratitude. Thank you, Mark, I whispered. You have no idea how much that means to me. The following weekend, Mark suggested we spend some time away from the city to clear our minds and figure out our next steps. He had found a cozy little cabin by a lake about 2 hours away, and it seemed like the perfect escape. As soon as I saw the place, I felt all my worries start to melt away. It was secluded, surrounded by towering pine trees, and the view of the lake was breathtaking. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to relax. We spent the weekend walking along the shore, cooking meals together, and simply enjoying each other's company. In the evenings, we sat by the fireplace, wrapped in blankets, talking about our dreams and fears. Mark told me about how he had once dreamed of traveling the world, exploring ancient ruins, and uncovering history's secrets. And I found myself sharing things with him that I had never told anyone, not even Daniel. Why didn't you pursue that dream? I asked one evening as we sat on the porch, the stars twinkling above us. I guess life just took me in a different direction, he replied, shrugging. But maybe it's not too late. Maybe I'll get there one day. I reached out and took his hand. I think you will, I said softly. And I'll be right there with you. He turned to look at me, his eyes filled with an emotion that took my breath away. Rachel, he began, his voice trembling. I've never felt this way about anyone before. You make me feel alive in a way I didn't think was possible. I feel the same way, I confessed, my heart racing. You've brought something back into my life that I thought I had lost forever. We shared a kiss under the stars, and in that moment I knew that I had made the right choice. This was where I was meant to be, and I was ready to embrace whatever the future held for us. When we returned to Seattle, the reality of my situation hit me. Daniel and I began the process of filing for divorce, and although it wasn't easy, we managed to handle everything amicably. He moved out of the house, and I took on the challenge of rebuilding my life. It was a strange feeling, learning how to be on my own again, but I was determined to make it work. And with Mark by my side, I felt stronger than I had in years. Our relationship grew even deeper during this time. Mark was there for me through every step of the divorce, supporting me when I felt overwhelmed and encouraging me to keep moving forward. He even started bonding with Ethan, who had taken an immediate liking to him. They spent hours playing soccer in the backyard, laughing and sharing stories, and I could see that Ethan was slowly adjusting to the changes in our family dynamic. One evening, as I watched them from the kitchen window, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. This was my family now, and it felt right in a way that I couldn't explain. Months went by, and the divorce was finalized. It was a bittersweet moment, but I knew it was the beginning of a new chapter in my life. One evening, as I was putting away some dishes, Mark came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. You know, he murmured against my ear, I've been thinking about something. I turned around to face him. What's that? He took a deep breath, and I could see a flicker of nervousness in his eyes. I want us to be a real family, Rachel, he said, his voice steady. You, me, and Ethan. I want to be there for you both, not just as a boyfriend or a tutor, but as something more. My heart skipped a beat. What are you saying, Mark? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. As he opened it, I saw the most beautiful ring I had ever seen, sparkling in the dim light of the kitchen. Rachel, will you marry me? He asked, his voice filled with hope. Tears filled my eyes, and I felt a wave of happiness wash over me. Yes, I whispered, nodding. Yes, I'll marry you. He slipped the ring onto my finger, and we stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, knowing that we were about to start the greatest adventure of our lives together. Our wedding was a small, intimate ceremony by the very same lake where we had spent that unforgettable weekend together. We decided to keep it simple, inviting only our closest friends and family. Ethan stood proudly as our little witness, grinning from ear to ear as he handed us the rings. The sun was setting over the water, casting a warm golden glow, and everything felt like a dream. As I stood there holding Mark's hands, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace and happiness. It was as if all the pieces of my life had finally fallen into place. "Rachel," Mark began, his voice steady and full of emotion, "I promise to love you, to respect you, and to support you in all that you do. You have brought so much light into my life, and I will spend every day making sure you never feel alone again." Tears welled up in my eyes as I took a deep breath. "Mark," I replied, my voice shaking, "I promise to be your partner, your confidant, and your best friend. You have shown me what it means to truly love, and I can't wait to spend the rest of my life with you." We exchanged rings, sealing our vows with a kiss, and at that moment, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. The months that followed were some of the happiest of my life. Mark moved in with us, and we quickly settled into our new routine as a family. Ethan adored having Mark around, and it wasn't long before he started referring to him as Dad. It melted my heart to see how effortlessly Mark stepped into that role, always patient, always kind, and always ready with a smile or a helping hand. We made a point of spending time together as a family, taking trips to the mountains, exploring local parks, and spending lazy Sundays in our backyard, laughing and playing games. Every moment was a reminder of how lucky I was to have found this second chance at happiness. One day, about a year after we got married, Mark came home with a huge smile on his face. "I have a surprise for you," he announced, pulling me into his arms. "Another surprise?" I teased, laughing. "You spoil me, you know that?" "This one's different," he said, his eyes twinkling with excitement. "Remember when I told you about my dream of traveling and exploring ancient ruins?" "Of course," I replied, nodding. "You've always wanted to do that." "Well," he continued, "I got a call today. There's a team of archaeologists heading to a dig site in Greece, and they want me to be a part of it." My eyes widened in disbelief. "Mark, that's amazing. This is your dream." "I know," he said, his smile softening. "But it's not just my dream anymore. It's ours. I want us to go together, Rachel. You, me, and Ethan. We can make this an adventure for our whole family." Tears filled my eyes as I realized just how much my life had changed since the day Mark walked into it. "I'd love that," I whispered, wrapping my arms around him. "I'd love nothing more." And so we began preparing for our next big adventure, filled with excitement and anticipation for what lay ahead. As we packed our bags and planned our journey, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come. From a woman trapped in a loveless marriage to someone who had found the courage to seek out the happiness she deserved. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, I turned to Mark and smiled. "You know," I said, resting my head on his shoulder, "I never thought I'd find this kind of happiness. I never thought I'd find you." He kissed the top of my head, pulling me closer. "And I never thought I'd find someone who would change my life the way you have," he replied. "Thank you for taking this journey with me." I closed my eyes, savoring the moment, and knew that no matter where life took us, we would always have each other. Because in the end, love wasn't about finding someone who completed you. It was about finding someone who made you feel complete. And as we sat there, surrounded by the warmth of our home and the love we had built together, I knew that our story was far from over. It was only just beginning. Thanks for watching. The next story is ready and just as thrilling. Subscribe to catch new stories every day.